Hello, welcome to another episode of Iceland News Review. I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine, the editor of Iceland Review, enjoying this beautiful Icelandic summer day. And today we're going to talk about the EU. We're going to talk about mysterious bones dug up from the ground. We're going to talk about puffins and all kinds of great stuff. So thanks for joining us today. Let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about the European Union. Now, as you might know, Iceland is not a member of the European Union. It is in the Schengen area and it is a part of the European Economic Area, but joining the European Union has always been a very contentious subject in this country. And polls that have been done over the past 10 years when it comes to the subject of whether or not to join the EU have always been kind of 50-50, because there would, of course, be some economic benefits to it. And after all, we do have to obey all of Europe's laws while not having a voice in Parliament. But two lobbies in particular, the fishing industry and the agricultural industry, have always had concerns about their own sovereignty and competition and things of that nature. Well, a new poll from Maskina showed that about 44.3% of respondents are in favor of joining the EU, which is, pretty much par for the course. It's more or less 50-50. But interestingly, a whopping 74.2% of Icelanders are in favor of a national referendum on whether or not to join. Now, for some background, we actually were in talks to join the European Union once. Between 2009 and 2013, Iceland's one and only left-wing government, that would being the Social Democrats, Samfylking, and the Left Greens, were in government together, and Samfylking had always very much been in favor of joining the EU, and so they had started the talks. But in 2013, they lost the election, the Conservatives got back into power, and in 2015, then Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson very unceremoniously ended those talks. All that being said, the European Union has said that they are open anytime to going back to the table. All right. Next, in crime news, there was a very unusual heist in Reykjavik not too long ago. So, a master plumber named Alma Gunnarsson, who's one of the owners of the company Landslagnir, he had kept his tools in a 40-foot container on Landslagnir's private lot, which is down in Grandi in Fiskisljóð. So one day he came to work and discovered that the container was gone, just disappeared. And he had no idea what had happened. And after making some calls, he learned that the moving company ET Movers told him that they had received a call telling them to move the container from that lot to another lot at the opposite end of town. And so he went out there. He had no idea, of course, who made this call. ET Movers couldn't tell him either. He went out there, he found his container, but it was completely cleaned out. Just everything was stolen. Tools valued between 10 and 14 million ISK. But it gets even weirder because the moving company said that they didn't know who made the call. Someone just called them up and said, yeah, move this container. And they told the moving company to send the invoice to a construction company in Akureyri. So upon calling this construction company, they're like, yeah, we got this invoice, but we have no idea what this is for. So, and the thieves themselves apparently used a burner phone. So not only is it going to be impossible to track down who these were, barring, surveillance cameras or something like that, a construction company is on the hook for an invoice for a job they never asked for. ET Movers, who okayed moving this container, is not able to tell the owner who made this call. And so, as you might imagine, Almar is lawyering up and has been talking to his insurance company in the hopes of being able to get some sort of compensation. But I hope it works out for him. As it stands now, though, the chances of finding the thieves are slim to none. What started over an argument about parking has led to the revelation of 20% of those who take domestic flights within Iceland come back home on the same day. So just for some more context, Reykjavik, being Iceland's urban center, is home to a lot of institutions that you can't necessarily find in the countryside, or you find like a smaller version of them. And so it's very typical for people in the countryside to fly into the city and then back again. At the end of June, the airports of Iceland, Akureyri, and Reykjavik began to charge money. Now in Reykjavik Airport, that's not to be confused with Keflavik International Airport. I'm talking about the domestic airport in Reykjavik, which is down this way. Parking there is free for the first 15 minutes on one of their lots and for the first 45 minutes on another of the lots. In Akureyri and Iceland, parking is free for up to 14 hours. Now, it was originally 15 minutes, but there were a lot of objections raised to this. Like, what is that, 15 minutes? And so it was bumped up to 5 hours. But this argument then got more heated, with Minister of Finance Sigurður Ingi Jóhannsson pointing out that yes, many people do travel domestically and return on the same day, mostly for medical treatment. And one MP from the Progressive Party, of which Sigurður Ingi is the chair, Ingibjörg Isaksen, she contended in Parliament that 85% of domestic flyers go to their destination and come back on the same day. So this was something that she'd heard anecdotally, apparently. And so the East Iceland news service, Austurfrétt, they decided to actually get the data. They contacted several. This prompted the East Iceland news service, Austurfrétt, to actually look into the data. And what they discovered, pardon me, is that 20% of people who take domestic flights come back the same day. Not 85%, 20%. The largest group by far, 28%, stay longer than 3 days. 18% of passengers return home the day after they've got to their destination. 20% return home after 2 days, and 14% after 3 days. Iceland's leading expert on puffins is now calling for more drastic measures to try to save our puffin population, Iceland's iconic bird. If you come to this country, you don't even have to go to where the puffins are to see puffins. Well, you will find stuffed puffins, puffin stickers, puffin patches all over the city. And when they're nesting and in season, you'll also find them in many places out in the countryside. In fact, 20% of the global population of puffins nests in the Westman Islands. Those are those teeny little islands off the south coast of Iceland. 20% of the global population of puffins can be found in the Westman Islands alone. And there are 3 million nesting pairs across the country. Those might seem like big numbers, but their population has been steadily declining by a staggering 70% since 1995. And as we discussed in the last video, Erpusnár Hansen, who is the leading expert on puffins, has called for the government to take stricter measures, because right now the government is just saying hunters maybe shoot fewer puffins and restaurants maybe sell less puffin meat. He wants to go full bore and has actually proposed that instead of like asking nicely, he wants to ban puffin hunting on state land altogether. And Iceland's state public land covers a wide area, including many puffin nesting grounds. And by putting a ban on hunting puffins on state land, that would indeed reduce hunting, which he believes overhunting has been a problem for 200 years or so. But it needs to be said that the puffin population decline, hunting is only responsible for 20% of the puffin population decline. So there are other factors in play, such as climate change, like the fish that they eat have been in decline. But nonetheless, that definitely warrants reducing hunting and reducing the buying of puffin meat. So, as I said in the last video, if you come to Iceland and you go to a restaurant and you see puffin meat on the menu, maybe don't order it. Speaking of animals that are iconic to Iceland, there's the Icelandic sheep. Now, Icelandic sheep have very few predators, as you might imagine. There's no wolves in this country, after all. However, there is an insidious disease called Scrapie, and this is a type of prion. And when sheep catch this, it attacks their nervous system. It is highly contagious and incurable and ultimately fatal. In the past, when Icelandic sheep have contracted Scrapie, farmers have had no choice but to cull the entire flock. And that's devastating, of course, for the livelihood of these farmers, but most important of all, it's devastating for the sheep themselves. But there's a bright spot in this, because it was recently discovered that there are Icelandic sheep that have a gene that is resistant to Scrapie. And so a government effort has been started a couple years back to isolate these Scrapie-resistant sheep and breed them together in the hopes of replacing the old Scrapie-vulnerable stock with the new Scrapie-resistant stock. And in fact, Bjarki Olsen Gunnarsdóttir, who is the Minister of Food, Hrönn Ólína Jörundsdóttir, who is the Director of the Icelandic Food and Veterinary Authority, and Trausti Hjálmarsson, who is the Chairman of the Icelandic Farmers Association, long titles, they got together and they signed a national plan with the aim of completely eradicating the disease over the next 20 years, which is very good news for Icelandic farmers, but it's also very good news for the Icelandic sheep. Now, there's a common myth about Iceland that it's the most atheist country in the world. What you might not know is that Iceland has a national church, specifically the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Iceland. And registration in this church has always been great. They've always been the leading religion in the country, as you might imagine. However, new data from the National Registry has shown that in as little as 5 years, people registered in the national church could be in the minority. Well, that's if current trends continue, because in 2019, 65.2% of all Icelanders in the National Registry were registered in the national church. However, now in 2024, those numbers are at 55.9%. So yes, if this trend continues, people registered in the national church will be in the minority. Why is this happening? Well, it needs to be pointed out that there are 61 legally recognized religions and philosophical organizations in Iceland. And outside of the national church, the largest numbers can be found at Fríkirkjan, which is an independent Lutheran church, Catholics, whose numbers have been steadily increasing, Ásatrúarfélagið, or the Ásatrú Fellowship, which is a Norse neo-pagan group, and Siðmennt, which is the Humanist Society. Their numbers have also been steadily increasing. However, there is perhaps a grain of truth to this idea that this is a very atheistic country. Not everyone in Iceland is registered in some legally recognized faith or philosophical organization, and 21.8% of all those in the National Registry are classified as undefined, in that they did not indicate any sort of membership in a religion, a faith, or a philosophical organization, and that's up from 13% in 2019. That being the case, the undefined have been increasing at a rate almost pardon me. That being the case, those classified as undefined have been rising at a rate almost as much as membership in the National Church has been steadily decreasing. Now, they're probably never going to be the majority in this country, but with the increasing number of Catholics and the increasing number of registrations in the Humanist Society and the increasing number of undefineds, it does appear to be having a significant effect on the national church, and it likely won't be very long, like next 5 or 6 years, before membership in the national church is below 50%. So this is Eyjasgata, and this is a street between Snorrabraut, which is down there, and Bárustígur, which is up there. So it might not look it, it might not look it now, but this street was last paved in 1930, and so they've naturally had to do replacements recently by digging up the asphalt, and which is a pretty mundane traffic test, but this led to uncovering a mystery that was kind of chilling at first. Now, just to give you a little background, here's a little fun fact about Iceland. Cars first came to the country in 1904, but they didn't really become a thing until the Second World War. This will be relevant for what follows. So this digging, which we can see down here, as they were digging, they uncovered some bones. And a contractor for the utility company's Veitur had told reporters that they were, quote, "We were digging here by the cold water pipes and we found a pelvis or socket joint or something like that, but we didn't give it much thought because apparently that's a very common thing to find bones." But as when you're doing road excavations in Iceland, but as they continued digging, they started to find more bones, and then they got concerned, and so they contacted the police. Forensic analysis was done, and they were able to identify the remains as belonging to either a cow or horse. Now, in Reykjavik today, it's probably pretty unusual to see a cow or a horse downtown, but you know, it wasn't too long ago when this was actually a really common sight. As I said, cars did not really become much of a thing in Iceland until the Second World War. I mean, of course, there were cars in the country. Between 1904 and the Second World War, people did drive, but horses and cows were not an unusual sight at all. And so, finding horse remains in downtown Reykjavik, not very unusual. Now, so far, there have not been any further investigations done as to how old the horse is, how it died, and why it was buried here, of all places. And so that part of the story will likely remain a mystery for time to come. So that's all I have for you today here at Iceland News Review. I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine. I'm going to see if I can salvage this script, which is now like dishcloths rather than paper, and we will see you next week.